So I was going to work from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse 44. Bhogaishvarya prashaktanam kaya parhita chetasam vyavasayatmika buddhi samadho na vidhiyate. In the minds of those who are too attached to sense enjoyment and material opulence, and who are bewildered by such things, the resolute determination for devotional service to the Supreme Lord does not take place. In the minds of those who are too attached to sense enjoyment and material opulence, and who are bewildered by such things, the resolute determination for devotional service does not take place. So we are going to go on a little journey today, I hope. We'll see how this works out. I'm going to try something a little different. When we were kids, we used to explore caves. You know, I know if you grew up in New York City, you don't explore caves. There's no caves. And actually there is. If you go down Atlantic Boulevard, right about where Trader Joe's is, there's a manhole there, and it goes into a cave, an underground fixture that's mysterious, and they don't allow you to go there. It was built back in, 100 or 200 years ago, and there's all kinds of mysterious things in there, but you can't explore that cave. It's illegal. And it's, a couple of blocks away. But anyway, we used to explore caves. I don't know if any of you have ever explored caves. It's not for people who have claustrophobia, because you are going into the dark, and there are these little crevices. You push yourself through them. Sometimes you're scraping along, on your hands and knees, because this area has been cut by water. And water sometimes makes a big channel and sometimes makes a little channel. And it's dark. Really dark. We used to use something called carbide lights. A lot of people probably never heard of a carbide light. Instead of flashlights have batteries, and batteries don't last that long. And if you're in a cave for an hour or two, you don't want your flashlight going dark. It's not the thing to have happen to you. So we would put these metal lights, which had a little bottom tin and a top tin where you'd fill with water, and the bottom was filled with calcium carbide. It's a rock-like chemical, and when the water drops on it, it produces acetylene. And the acetylene gets pushed out the front, and you light it, and it becomes very bright, way brighter than any electric flashlight. We used to use those. So with that kind of as a preface, the human body, the body that we live in, I don't know how many people think about it. It's kind of the intersection of a number of different worlds. We usually don't pay any attention to it. We don't recognize it. It's something that just we don't pick up on. But the human body is like an intersection between different worlds. We have an external world, but we also have an internal world. Now, most of us spend very little time in the internal world. We are focused on this external world. And the external world is a place that we sort of feel comfortable with. We know how it works. If you're a scientist, you perform experiments out here in this world. This is the world where, the physicists do some kind of experimentation to find out how reality works. F equals ma, E equals mc squared. We have these various formulae. We learn that 2 atoms of hydrogen and 1 of oxygen make water. And as we were saying, if you add H2O and calcium carbide, you get acetylene. So you get these different things happening in the external world. But what about the internal world? It's like a cave. We all have one, right? It's one of those places we don't go very often, but we want to go there today. We're going to try to put on our cave outfit and venture a little bit into that internal world. Because the internal world is the place where a lot of things are going on, but we don't usually pay attention to them. We don't usually even think about them. Now, for right now, I want you all to close your eyes. You know, we can open them again in a few minutes, but close your eyes. I'm going to be watching, too. See that everybody does. Now, notice how these people aren't closing their eyes. We need a bat here or something like that. So if you close your eyes, you notice how different the world suddenly becomes. You've just got my voice and this darkness. Close your eyes for just a minute. We can open them again in a minute or two. But notice how things change just by closing your eyes. There's a different world suddenly. That world's different than the one we were just at a minute ago with our eyes open. Now, our bodies haven't moved. We haven't taken any kind of psychogenic substances or anything, but suddenly the world has changed. By closing our eyes, we're in an internal world. Now you can open them again. Some of you never close them. But that internal world is a world. It's very different from this external world. You can't do experiments in that world. There's no microscopes. You can't figure out how the chemistry works there. It's a completely different world. Now, if you're really tired and you close your eyes, you'll go into another world. We call that dreams, you know. Some of you may be that tired. But if you close your eyes, you will recognize that there's another world there, the world of dreams. And that world is also a world. It has people and things happen, but they happen in a different way. So in the Vedas, people would try to understand something about this internal world, this world on the inside. It's a very rich world, but, you know, some of us are probably extroverts and some of us are probably introverts. And some people, when they close their eyes, they don't feel comfortable at all. They feel like that inside world is a dangerous world. It's a strange world. It's a world that's not very comfortable. It's a world that we don't know what will happen next in there, so we keep our eyes open. We think and we live in this outside world. So our eyes immediately focus us on a world, this external world, the one we think we know. This external world is not as well known as we think it is, but it's the world we think we know. The internal world is like a cave. It's dark in there. And some people might say it's boring in there. Or some people might say it's, disturbing in there. My mother told me one time that she tried meditation and it terrified her. It terrified her. She never wanted to do it again. So, it shows that some people experience very different things on the inside, this internal, mysterious world. Now, in a world where it's all dark, what is there? what is there in this internal world? What kind of things are in there? It's like a cave, but a cave still has things, even if you don't have a light, there are bugs in there, and sometimes snakes and other kinds of things. But in our internal world, well, what do we have in there? Still sound. Now that's an important thing. If you close your eyes, there's still sound. And that's why a lot of meditation techniques have people closing their eyes. We hear this in Bhagavad Gita. In chapter 6, Krishna talks about meditation, where someone stares at the tip of the nose. Now, the idea of staring at the tip of the nose was that if you're like most people, when you close your eyes, that dream world sort of, decides to preempt everything else. You're listening, doing something, but instead you find yourself kind of snoozing along, so you go off into the dream world. But if you're well rested in your practice, when you close your eyes, you can actually go into an internal world. And that internal world of meditation is a world that changes us in a very deep, profound way. So in chapter 15 of Bhagavad Gita, we hear about the senses being grouped about the mind. So the senses are grouped about the mind. So we have senses. We have the eyes, the ears, the tongue, the nose. We have the skin. We have these senses. Now, even when you close your eyes, the other senses are still working. You can still smell when the eyes are closed. You can still feel externally and internally when you close your eyes. You can still hear when you close your eyes. You can still taste things when you close your eyes. And when you close your eyes, you become aware of things, if you're paying attention, that you never are aware of when your eyes are open. Like what's going on inside your body. If something hurts, if something feels strange, is your stomach doing something funny? Is your throat doing something funny? Some people, when they close their eyes, they can hear internal sound, not sound that's coming from outside, but sound that's coming from inside. This internal world is a place. It's a world. It's just as full of things as this external world. But like I say, most of us don't go there. If you're an extrovert, you probably never go there. If you're an introvert, maybe you go there sometimes. You visit that mysterious internal world. And what else is there in there? We see that we were just talking about there's sound in there you can smell. You can also taste. And you have feeling. What you don't have is vision because you've closed your eyes. So all those things are in there. Now we learn that the internal world actually takes you to the spiritual world, this internal world. In the Bible it says the kingdom of God is within you. So we also have that idea that Radha and Krishna are there. In fact, the entire spiritual world is there. But usually we are so focused on this outside world and we take it so seriously, we never visit the internal world. And if we want to ever go there, we're a little bit terrified of what we might find there. And partly it has to do with some of the things that are there that we usually don't pay attention to. For instance, our mind is there in the internal world. In the external world, we don't notice our mind. Our mind is just having its happy chance to tell us all kinds of garbage and weird things, and we just don't even notice it. But when we're internal, we're closing the eyes for the external world, suddenly our mind becomes the biggest deal. Our mind is telling us things, and sometimes it tells us disturbing things. And this is why we learn in Bhagavad Gita that controlling the mind makes it our best friend, and failure to control it makes our worst enemy. But sometimes, we had this conversation last Sunday with someone, that aren't we the mind? If we're thinking, isn't that us? That's what René Descartes said, that the cogito ergo sum, that I think, therefore I am. But actually, we are not the mind. We are the self, the soul. The mind is something different. And if I tell you all, for the next 2 minutes, do not think of a pink elephant. Whatever you do, don't think of a pink elephant. Immediately pink elephant images come into your mind, right? I just told you not to think of them. So that shows that our mind has a mind of its own. And that mind of its own means that the mind actually has what are known in Sanskrit as samskaras. So for many past lifetimes, we have done things in a particular pattern. We have done things habitually in a particular way. And now, even if we try to do them in a different way, it's very difficult. We tend to do things in a particular way. And in the past, we filled our minds full of nice, fresh garbage of various kinds from all kinds of sources. And now all that stuff is in there. And so we're listening to a Bhagavatam class or watching the deities or doing something, and suddenly garbage comes up from somewhere. And this is because our samskaras, our patterns of thinking, have been so strongly formulated that we have trouble pushing them aside. So this mind has to be controlled. And this is why sometimes for people, this internal world is not a very comfortable place, because the mind is in there. What else is in there in this internal world? Emotions. You can imagine right now, we're all sitting here in a class, probably most of you are kind of okay emotionally. But what if you just had an intense argument with someone that was your spouse or lover or something like that? You can imagine how listening to this class would be very different because of an extreme emotional content. So we can't see emotions. We can't hear them. We can't smell them. But we sure feel them. So they're on the inside there. And this is why the idea of meditation is such a worldwide thing. Why in meditation, all over the world, people try some form of meditation. And this is to focus on the internal world and to stop focusing on the external world, particularly the eyes. And one can focus on, in some cases, the breathing. That's another thing that's in the internal world, the breath. Now, that's the doorway to mystic yoga, if you want to go that route, but we don't recommend. But when you breathe, that breathing is an internal experience. And if you focus on the breathing, particularly the ingoing and outgoing breath, you can drill it in such a way that as you breathe in, your chest shrinks. And as you breathe out, your chest expands. It should do the other thing. Usually when we breathe in, our chest expands, and when we breathe out, our chest shrinks. But in yoga, you're doing the opposite thing. You're trying to expand your chest when you breathe in, and you're trying to contract your chest when you breathe out. And so it looks like your chest isn't moving at all. And then you start to regulate your breathing, and you start to pay attention not to what you see, not to what you taste, not to what your mind is saying, not toward your emotions. We've talked about all this stuff that's in that internal world. These things you can't see. That's why they're so hard to recognize or think about, because they're invisible to the eye, but they are certainly experiences. So on the internal plane, we try to focus just on the breathing. That's one way. That's one kind of meditation. Another kind is where we focus on a sound. Now, we just said that by focusing internally, by closing the eyes, then we are focusing on the sound that's coming to us. Now, we can be making sound too. And this is what the devotees do. This is what we call the Maha Mantra. By closing the eyes and sitting still, one can just focus on the sound of Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Now that sound has a pattern to it. And we can do it in a way where that pattern repeats, and we try to focus on nothing else but that sound. And of course, as we've been talking about, we're exploring the cave now. We're exploring that world that happens when you shut your eyes. When you shut your eyes, there's that cave. What's in there? We just talked about it. There's emotions in there. There is dreams in there. We don't want to go there. What else is in there? We have remembering. We have memory of things in the past. So some people have a strong mind's eye. You know, when people who are graphic artists, like painters and sculptors and things like that, they can visualize things without seeing them in there before them. So some people have a strong visual memory, some have a strong audible memory, and we can reminisce. So that's another thing that's in there. The memories and the things we've done in the past. We can get lost in the past, or we can get lost in the future. The future's there too. We're thinking about what we'll do in the future. Some of you probably right now are wishing this guy would shut up so we could go downstairs and eat some prasadam, you know. So, there's the future in there as well, you know. So we have the past and we have the future. Now, when we're hearing, we're trying not to go to dreamland. We're trying not to go to emotion land. We're trying not to open the eyes and go out here and start, deciding that that picture's a little crooked and that we have a tear in our socks and we have to do something about it. We're trying not to go out there, and we're trying to just hear the sound. Now, this is a struggle, and it depends on how comfortable you are on this internal world, how much of a struggle that is. But if you stay with it, and it's kind of like if you were by the bank of a river and you're watching things float by in the river. Maybe it's a dirty river and there's a lot of junk in it. And for analogies of our own consciousness, this is a good metaphor. That imagine there's a river and there's a lot of junk in the river, and we're sitting by the side of the river and we watch it float by, but we don't stop when we see a piece of junk. We just let it float on down, and we bring ourselves back to just hearing our own voice and the sound of the holy name. Just hearing our own voice. And of course, in the very beginning, it's kind of like riding a bicycle, that you do it and you fall over, and then you fall over again, and then you realize the past 15 minutes you haven't been paying no attention to what you've been hearing. But you stay with it. And if you do it long enough, and you try hard enough, and you pray to Radha Govinda to help you, you will find you reach something that is like the beginning of what we could call trance, where you are just hearing this sound, and you are watching the memories float by. You're watching the future, what you plan to do tomorrow or in 15 minutes float by. You're watching what happened in the past float by. And if something pops up to the surface that makes you angry suddenly or afraid or whatever, you watch that float by, and you're just focused on staying in this trance of trying to hear the holy name. And this is how the entire self becomes very purified by this chanting of the holy name and by hearing this sound vibration. Now, it is possible also to do this while walking, most of the time walking, but and with your eyes open. You have to keep your eyes open when you're walking unless you're some kind of special situation. But for some, it might be easier to start doing this by sitting down. But the internal world, if that world be purified, this external world will be a different place. Our experience of what's coming to us from the external world will be a very, very different place. So we see that people talk about religion, but this is religion. Changing the inside core of our being, changing that inner world. And the most important thing that's in that inner world is our desires. Right now, if we don't watch what we're doing, our desires will govern our complete direction in this world, in the external world. Whatever we want will be the only thing that pushes us in a particular direction in the external world. But most of what we want is part of that mud ball of our mind, that stuff that we patterned in there, the samskaras, that stuff from many past lifetimes. That's what it is. It's all that stuff. And most of those do no good to us. They won't help us. We won't be able to get them. They're a mess. They'll track us into being entangled in worse desires. And then we'll get the karma from the things we've done because we followed those desires. So by hearing the holy name, we become peaceful. The emotional level goes down. We become aware that the inside internal world, that cave, that dark place, is actually a nice place. If we do it long enough, we'll realize it's not even dark, that there's a world in there. The cave opens up and we begin to see the spiritual world in there. But that's way down the line. That's way, way down the line. But this is the real essence of religion. If religion isn't changing you as a person, then it isn't religion, really. It's some kind of external ritual only. So I had a lot of other things I was going to say, but I'm going to stop there. And then I'm going to ask if there are any questions or comments, and then we'll let everybody go take prasadam. Any questions or comments? Yes. He's going to give you a mic so I can hear it. I'm an old man. I should be wearing a hearing aid, but I don't. So.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much for the class. You had mentioned that the spiritual world is actually in the internal world. And so would that mean that the map that we see generally of the worlds that we see, like the spiritual world, like would you say Goloka Vrindavan is in a certain place in the internal world?
Well, yes, but it's like a complete different dimension in there. That right now that dimension is removed. And right now the doors are closed there. And that's actually what yoga is about too. You know, mystic yoga and meditation, it's all about that same thing. To be peaceful, to be able to sit in one location is not a common thing. And that's why, in general, we don't recommend the usual yoga type of meditation, using the breath and that. We recommend instead the chanting of Krishna's name, which can be done walking or it can be done sitting. And when we develop the right attitude, so that's another thing that's internal, that's inside, is attitudes. And, attitudes are important because we can do things in a mechanical, perfunctory way. And they still have some effect, but we have to learn how to do things in a feeling way, which is something we can't exactly fake. But if we make an effort as we're chanting and being purified with the chanting, we can come to the point where we're chanting and actually kind of grasping the essence of what we're trying to do with the chanting. We're not just doing it because we have 16 rounds and we have to complete them before breakfast or whatever it is. We have a deeper motivation to it. And then we begin to think, well, how do I actually chant in a feeling way? And then after we've kind of able to do a little bit of trance and not get lost in memories and past and future and get lost in emotions and, other stuff that the mind is junking down on us, when we can hold a certain kind of balance on just the sound, then we can start to focus on, well, what kind of mood should I be doing this in? Thinking about that mood. And if you do it long enough and you pray to Krishna, Krishna will start to help you to develop that actual mood, internal mood. And, I'm surprised. I've been chanting for many, many years, and only recently I've started to think about the mood with which I chant, what mood should be there and how you get it. And, I've wasted so many years of chanting, I'm just ashamed to even talk about it, that you can chant and not be paying attention to what you're doing, or do it just as, a obligation that you have to get out of the way that you do. But, when you try to take it beyond that, then you realize that this world has many dimensions, and the internal dimension it's just as big as the external world. But because we're not practiced in that world, because we live in this outside world, the eyes, so that's why we're sometimes we need to close the eyes and just open the ears, and to work at trying to go second after, I fell off again, like riding a bicycle, Eventually you get to the point where you can spend more moments while you're actually attentive to the sound, and then you can start thinking about, well, what mood am I in right now, and all this is happening while you're still trying to pay attention to the sound. And then eventually you start to feel that the chanting of the holy name is doing something in your life, and that you really are penetrating into that world that we read about in Bhagavatam, we read about in Bhagavad Gita, but it's a real world. But right now, because of our samskaras, our past bad habits, our past way of thinking, we're divorced from it. Any other? Yes, Rishi's going to tell us something.
Thank you, Maharaj, for that philosophical class. What the devotees think, it's quite reverse what the materialists think. Please highlight a little bit how the devotees think. Devotees' internal business is thinking about beautiful pastimes of Radha and Krishna, or Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is taking his whole gang, chanting and dancing, and many other beautiful pastimes. That's what the devotees think. And devotees think many, many, many beautiful pastimes of the Supreme Lord. And if that could be exposed a little bit, so that those who have neophytes, they can also try to think in that perspective.
Well, I think a lot of us come from a religious background where God is known in such threadbare non-detail that it's hard to imagine how anybody would be attracted to God, the way it's presented for the most part, you know. We need to know what God is doing. We need to know why he's doing what he's doing. We need to know about his potencies and energies. And eventually we learn his pastimes, which is kind of the latter end of the scale. Now, with his pastimes, some people can absorb themselves in his pastimes, but most of us can't do that for very long. You know, so instead, we can engage in service. So by working in the external world, we can help make the internal world ready. And by working in the internal world, we can finally make the external world what it should be for us. Okay, so things are winding to a halt here. So I thank you all for enduring me and giving me your attention. All glories to Srimad Bhagavad Gita. All glories to the Vaishnava devotee. Hare Krishna.
Maharaj. Oh. Oh, Prabhuji. Playing Kotal. Like Kotal, Prabhuji.